So we're here with Larry Sanger. He now describes himself as the ex-founder of Wikipedia. Now he's become a critic, and he's also the executive director of the Knowledge Standards Foundation. Larry, thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. So I want to start off with Wikipedia. I know you've become a rather harsh critic of Wikipedia. What do you think's wrong with Wikipedia? I mean, why did you kind of turn against your baby, if you will?
Um, I've had a lot of criticisms over the years. I actually look at Wikipedia as a missed opportunity, a good idea that actually has produced something that's really useful. I've never denied that, that's for sure. But it could just be so much more than it is. And the problem that I see now, the problem that I dwell on mostly is just that it is a single website, and it has a unique culture that appeals to a very small subset of the people who are potentially interested in contributing to an encyclopedia. So any given month, they have on the order of something like 10,000 active contributors. Doesn't take much to be considered an active contributor. The really active contributors number in the hundreds, I believe. And that is just not very much for what used to be a top 5 site. Now it's dropped down to the 9th position in the Alexa.com rankings of website popularity. Anyway, it's still a top website, and yet it doesn't have millions of contributors like other top websites. That's very strange to me, right? So I think that what the world needs now is a decentralized network of encyclopedias that allow us to contribute from wherever we want using whatever encyclopedia standards appeal to us. But then, of course, everything needs to be brought under a single technical standard, enabling the different contributions to a knowledge commons to be collated together, as it were, and properly rated, but in also a decentralized way.
That's really interesting. I'm excited to get into what you're working on in that respect. But why do you think this happened with Wikipedia? Why do you think that the number of active contributors is so small relative to the amount of people who are interested in this? And also, what do you think about these claims that there's a lot of bias in Wikipedia? I mean, you hear conservatives complain a lot that there's a very liberal bias on Wikipedia. Do you think that's legitimate? Is that a legitimate criticism, or is that just conservatives with sour grapes?
I've been saying that I'm a libertarian or a conservatarian myself, and I've been saying that for I don't know, since about 2006 or so, something like that. It has gotten worse and worse, and it's definitely a problem now. It's obvious now. It didn't used to be really obvious, but now it really is. It's as obvious as the bias of the mainstream media. I think probably for similar reasons. Just the zeitgeist has pushed, I think, especially the left, but not only the left, really, when they are sharing what purports to be factual information about stuff. They think that it's their job to push their opinions about the facts as well. So okay, that is a problem. There's another problem that actually germinated, especially in 2002, like the second year of Wikipedia. Basically, there was this. Probably a good word for it would be cabal of bad actors who descended on the site and basically started undermining a lot of the more serious academic contributors, the original contributors, and kind of took it over, made the site hostile to a lot of ordinarily polite people and just experts, and made it into a kind of game that appeals, I think, especially to the radical left, frankly. I recognized my introduction to how the radical left interact with people was via Wikipedia, actually. Just seeing how the some of the worst actors were behaving in that in the project. So yeah, there's that. The real a deep problem that if they were to solve this, they would actually solve a lot of problems with Wikipedia. Is they have no set way of resolving disputes. It's a real problem. They insist that it is possible to have what they call a consensus view on an article or on a question. But because that's just a fantasy, it's just a figment of their imagination, they just use that as cover for people who want to impose their will on the rest of the people contributing to an article. And it becomes basically part of the game that is played. The people with the most pull in the system become the ones who can declare the consensus, even though there isn't such a thing. So what they need to do is have a fair democratic way of actually voting on specific questions about articles. I don't think they're going to ever change that, though.
That's really interesting, Larry. And just kind of an interesting anecdote. When I was living in Sweden, a friend of mine who was trying to do some changes on Wikipedia discovered somehow, is what he told me, that it seemed like the overwhelming majority of contributors were all working at government offices and were using government IP addresses for their contributions. So he said, that's weird. So basically, taxpayers are paying bureaucrats not to do their bureaucratic jobs, but to edit Wikipedia and basically promote the government's narrative. And whether they were under orders to do that or they were doing it just slacking off in the office wasn't clear. But then I tested that in the United States. I had been trying to fix some very obvious factual errors in a Wikipedia article, and when we had, and every time I would try to make the change, almost instantaneously it would be changed back to the false argument, and then. During the government shutdown, when they couldn't agree on a budget with Congress and President Trump, suddenly you could make any change you want and it wouldn't get changed back. And this lasted for the entire duration of the shutdown. I said, man, it must be bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. They don't come to work, and so they're out, hanging out with their kids or staying at the beach, whatever. And so we don't get these change back. So that was just an interesting thing. Larry, I'm curious about you're working now on the Knowledge Standards Foundation. You're the executive director of that. Tell us what you're doing, why you're doing it, and is this aimed at kind of remedying some of these problems that you've seen? Tell us about the project, what it entails, how it's going to work, and how people can support it and get involved if they choose to do that.
Yeah, so until last month, I was the chief information officer of Everipedia, a blockchain encyclopedia, and this is sort of a spin-off of that. We've decided it's important if there's going to be a network of encyclopedias. Basically, I like to think of it as the superset of all the articles online, and then as part of a network that would enable others who don't have the articles on any of those encyclopedias yet can contribute new articles. So you can think of the encyclosphere, as I call it, as modeled after the blogosphere. What I would love for there to be is a plug-in for WordPress, for example. So you go to your WordPress blog, you write a post, and then you press a button, and it formats it in a certain way, prepares the data so that it is submitted in a feed that you publish, just like your RSS feed, which enables your blog to be picked up by blog readers. So an encyclopedia feed would enable your properly formatted article to be picked up by basically encyclopedia article aggregators, and then that would make the whole searchable and rateable by anyone via all kinds of different apps. So the Knowledge Standards Foundation is not in the business of building an app. We are in the business of starting a decentralized movement one that is genuinely non-political and that does not empower any particular government or corporation to control knowledge. One that allows people to essentially come up with their own selections of raters for articles, and enables app developers to develop their own encyclopedias based on a knowledge commons. I hope I'm making sense here.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating, and a little bit technical, I think, for some people, and I'm probably one of the ones who are not very technologically savvy, but that sounds really interesting. And so how can people learn more about this, Larry? Do you guys have a website now that people can go to?
Yeah, so it should be available for everyone to look at after October 17. It's knowledge. Well, you can search online for Knowledge Standards Foundation, but the website is encyclosphere.org, and we've got
encyclosphere.org.
Yeah, we've got a group blog already going. I'm putting groups of different volunteers together to do different things. I don't want all the development and all the theorizing necessarily to be done on the one website. Like I say, I want to actually try to start a decentralized movement. So I actually want there to be different apps developing different aspects of this general idea at the same time. But I'm going to be a cheerleader for anybody who is working on this. And eventually, hopefully within the next few years, we will publish the first version of finalized standards. I think the first thing we'll do is basically make it possible to track all the metadata, all the data about articles, all across the web, but from within one shared database, essentially. So, yeah, you'll be able to, if you want to go and search for an encyclopedia article, you wouldn't search on Google, you wouldn't search on Wikipedia, you would search on one of these new apps, and it will give you a whole selection of articles. But it won't be just like a meta search engine. It'll be more sophisticated than that.
Wow, that sounds really great. And, I tell my students, don't bring me Wikipedia as a source. So this will be interesting, for students doing research. I'm really looking forward to learning more about this, Larry, as you guys develop it. Let's zoom out a little bit now and talk about the big picture in the minutes that we have left. You've been talking about for a while now, I've followed you on Twitter and some of your work, you've been talking about the need to kind of decentralize the internet, about how these big technology giants are trying to centralize everything, and then we really ought to be moving in the opposite direction. Could you speak a little bit about that, in kind of like easy terms that a layman could understand? What's the problem with having a centralized internet, and why should we be moving in the other direction, and how can an average person help bring that about?
Yeah. So the root problem is that we have different devices. We've got phones, we've got computers, and we're trying to talk to other people's phones and computers. And that means, and we don't want to email ourselves. Remember how you just did that in the 1990s? You have to email yourself something. No, we use the cloud for that, right? Well, cloud services are difficult. So they have to be centralized in order to be run. Who does that sort of running of the cloud and the centralization of the services? Well, it's Google, it's Facebook, it's Twitter, it's all the rest of those. But by making it so easy for us to communicate with each other via the cloud, they also have essentially taken ownership of all of our data. When it comes to communication, they've actually started censoring our speech, when all we want them to do is act as a medium of communication. That's all, just a service. So we now understand a lot more about software than we did like 15 years ago when a lot of these changes started coming down the pike, when the technological power started getting centralized in the hands of big tech. And what we need to do essentially is to decentralize social media, and there's all kinds of ways to do that. The blogosphere, it illustrates how it can be done. The blockchain is an excellent technology that can be used. There's other ways of having shared information online that is not in the hands of a corporation. That's the general idea. There's basically a shared database called IPFS. It's kind of like, if you remember the old Tor or BitTorrent network, or the music sharing services. So it works kind of like that, and we need a lot more of that. And there's a lot of motivated people, including a lot of motivated developers, and they're actually the ones who matter, because they will actually develop this stuff for us. So I think we will see in the next few years, definitely 5 years from now, we will see new systems that look and operate just as well as Google and Facebook and Twitter, et cetera, but they will be totally decentralized. So
Fantastic.
not all in silos, in individual power centers, but spread democratically out across all of us.
Okay, that sounds really good, because I know more and more people are getting concerned about this incredible power that these big technology companies now have, as you mentioned, to control what we can say, how we can say it. So that's really exciting. I'm glad to hear that developers are working on something to deal with that. One more question for you, Larry. You have been talking a lot about this scandal involving Epstein, and in particular how this kind of reaches into the technology world, into Silicon Valley. What can you tell us about this, and why is it important for people to care?
The thing that really caught my attention was when the news came out that Epstein had been arrested, and that there's a lot of really good evidence that he and people in his network had been abusing girls. And I looked more into it, and I was amazed to find, especially with the help of a guy who's now a friend of mine, I was amazed to find that the idea of an elite pedophile network, as crazy as it sounds at first, is not new. And in fact, there have been a number of instances of this. The Nexium cult is another example. And in Great Britain, there's the VIP pedophile scandal, which was never entirely broken wide, and then there's who's the comedian that I'm blocking his
Jimmy
name.
Savile?
Jimmy Savile, right? It wasn't just him. He also allegedly procured children for all kinds of other people. And it's the more I thought about this, and the more I learned about this, the more I concluded that power works differently than I understood it to. That if people are on video and photographs shown abusing children or committing other crimes, then they can be manipulated by people like Epstein or whoever Epstein's handlers are. And if that's true, then we don't know how the world works. At least I didn't know how the world worked. And it actually gave a little more credence to the whole Pizzagate thing. I had sort of forgotten about it, along with everybody else, But Epstein made me look into it some more. And after learning about pedophile scandals involving, again, very wealthy, well-connected, powerful people in actually lots of different countries, Australia, Belgium, in Hollywood, and so forth, it actually started sounding more plausible, right? And yet the mainstream media is not covering these stories. It didn't cover these stories very well, but at least there's enough information out there that you can perfectly rationally persuade yourself that the phenomenon is real, right? In other words, the phenomenon of elite pedophile networks. Mm-hmm. And I know for some people this is really basic, right? For me, and actually for most people, I think it's not basic. It's like horrifying news. And so I just think it's incredibly important. I mean, if this is how the world works, then it's your civic duty to learn about it and to do your part to take it down. I think the main thing that is needed is simply to spread awareness of it. Don't go off half-cocked. Don't be a nut. Share things that are well established, because there's a hell of a lot of stuff to share that is well established, and that is just horrible, right? So you don't need to talk about Hillary Clinton eating babies, for example, not without evidence, right. But there's so many other things to talk about that are horrific, that they were quietly reported a few years ago or a decade ago, whatever, and then just let go as if nothing really was happening there. It wasn't followed up. That's the big problem as far as the mainstream media's complicity in this. They mention something and drop it as if it didn't matter.
Yeah, and no connecting of the dots. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, Larry. Thank you so much. So, Larry, is there anything I didn't ask you about that you want to mention? And also, how can people find you? Give us your social media handles so people can follow you if they want to get involved with this stuff or see what you're up to. Tell us how to track you down on the World Wide Web.
Okay. On Twitter, it's L Sanger. And I also man the account of the Knowledge Standards Foundation. So if you're just interested in that, please follow that account too. It's KS_found. Yeah, I've kind of given up on most of social media, but we do have accounts that you can follow for the Knowledge Standards Foundation. You can look them up on things like Instagram and Facebook and whatnot. But really, where I would encourage you, if you want to get involved in this, then go to encyclosphere.org and make an account. And don't be shy. Share your thoughts and do what you can. I'm by the time this is posted, I believe I'm going to be asking for donations too, because I want to do this full time. And I'm not a rich person. I'm easily the poorest founder of a top 10 website. So yes, I'm just a middle class dude who actually has to work for a living. Yeah, if you want to make it possible for me to work on this full time and not just as a hobby, then donate, please.
Fantastic. Larry, thank you so much for what you're doing. Thank you for spending time with us. And folks, you heard it here, Larry Sanger, and go check him out on Twitter. Check out the Knowledge Standards Foundation, and thank you for watching.